Before the guns, before the charged soldiers, before the screams that were echoed through broken cities, there was Liberia. In 1847, on the edge of the Atlantic, a new nation raised its flag. Black men and women governed themselves, an African republic declaring independence at a time when most of the continent was still under colonial rule. Liberia became the first internationally recognized independent country in Africa. Across the continent, that moment mattered. For Africans living under European domination, Liberia was more than a country. It was a symbol. A message whispered across borders and generations. Freedom is possible. From the Gold Coast of Sierra Leone, from Nigeria to South Africa, Liberia's existence challenged the myth that Africans could not govern themselves. It stood as proof that black sovereignty was real, that self-rule could exist on African soil. There was pride, there was hope, there was a promise. But beneath that powerful symbol, a contradiction was quietly growing. A nation founded on freedom was struggling to extend that freedom equally to all its people. And over time, the gap between what Liberia represented to the world and what many Liberians experienced at home would widen. That unresolved tension between promise and reality would one day tear the nation apart. What began as Africa's brightest example would later become one of its most painful warnings. This is the story of how a nation born in hope descended into war. The contradiction will not explode overnight. For more than a century after independence, Liberia was governed by a sumo ruling elite, American Liberians, descendants of freed slaves from the United States of America, who held political power, economic control, and land ownership. To the outside world, Liberia stood as Africa's symbol of freedom. But for many indigenous Liberians, freedom felt distant. Political participation was limited. Opportunities were unequal. Traditional communities were largely excluded from the system that governed them. Quietly, resentment grew. Yet, the system endured until April 12, 1980. In the early hours of that morning, gunfire shattered the silence in Monrovia. A group of low-ranking soldiers stormed the executive mansion. But down, President William R. Tubman was dead. For the first time in Liberia history, the century-long dominance of American Liberians ended. At the center of that moment stood Master Sergeant Samuel Kayode, a young soldier from the Crown ethnic group. Across the country, there was celebration. Many indigenous Liberians believed the revolution had finally come, that power had returned to the people. But revolutions do not always deliver what they promise. Those governments quickly turned in war and hostile. Political opponents were arrested or executed. Independent voices were silenced. Power became concentrated around ethnic loyalty. The military, once seen as liberators, became feared. The economy collapsed, corruption deepened, human rights abuses multiplied. And in the northern counties, particularly Nimba County, entire communities were targeted. The Gill amount of people were accused of disloyalty. Villages were raided, civilians were killed. At later nights, Liberia was no longer just divided, it was angry. Younger men without jobs, communities without protection, a state without legitimacy. All it needed was a spark. That spark came on December 24, 1989. From the forests along the Ivorian border, a small group of armed men named National Patriotic Front of Liberia, led by Charles Gange Taylor, arrived. He spoke of justice, he spoke of liberation, he spoke to overthrow Samuel Doe. As the rebels advanced through Niba County, they were welcomed by communities who saw them not as invaders, but as rescuers. But liberation quickly turned into bloodshed. Those soldiers responded with brutality. Entire villages were burned, civilians were massacred. The war spread faster than anyone could control. By 1990, Liberia was no longer a nation in crisis. It was a nation at war. And as the fighting moved toward Monrovia, the capital itself would soon become a battlefield. What followed would change Liberia forever. As the rebels close in Monrovia began to tremble and crumble, by mid-1990, fear ruled the streets, families in churches, schools, and abandoned buildings hid. Food disappeared, electricity failed, the sound of gunfire became constant. The war had fractured. Within Charles Taylor's movement, a bitter split emerged. A former ally, Prince Yomi Johnson, broke away to form the Independent National Patriotic Front of Liberia. What followed was chaos. Rebel factions fought each other while civilians were trapped in between. There was no front line, only neighborhoods under siege. Then came a moment that would define Liberia's descent. On September 9, 1990, President Samuel Kouyando left the relative safety of the executive mansion to visit West African peacekeepers at the Freeport of Monrovia. There, he never returned. Doe was captured by Prince Johnson's fighters. He was tortured. He was killed. The president of Liberia died in camera. With Doe's death, the Liberian state collapsed. There was no government, no army. There was no rule of law. Liberia became a land ruled by guns. World laws carved the country into territories. Each controlled checkpoints, resources, and population. Each ruled through fear. Children were abducted, drugged, and handed weapons. Boys who should have been in classrooms became soldiers. Girls became fighters, poachers, and victims of sexual violence. The war consumed everything. Hospitals were looted, schools were turned into barracks, farms were abandoned, millions fled. Some crossed borders into Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Cote d'Ivoire. Others became refugees in their own land. Between 1990 and 1996, Liberia existed in a state of permanent emergency. The international community tried to stop the bleeding. West African leaders under ECOWAS deployed a regional peacekeeping force known as ECOMOG. Peace talks followed again and again. Agreements were signed Banjul, Yamoussoukro, Cotonou, and Kosovo. Each promised an end to the fighting. Each collapsed because the war had changed everything. It was no longer about ideology or justice. War had now become a business. Control of diamonds, timber, checkpoints meant power, and peace threatened that power. By 1996, Monrovia was destroyed, burned, looted, and exhausted. The people were tired. An act of exhaustion, a fragile decision was made. In 1997, elections were held. Charles Taylor ran for the presidency. Many Liberians believed that if Taylor won, the war would stop. They voted not with hope, but with fear. Taylor won overwhelmingly. For a moment, the guns were silent. But the silence did not last. Taylor's rule quickly became authoritarian. Opposition were crushed. Media was intimidated. Liberia became isolated from the world. And by 1999, the sound of gunfire returned. New rebel groups emerged, lured from the north and model from the southeast. Liberia had entered a second civil war. Once again, Monrovia was surrounded. Shells fell into civilian neighborhoods. Hospitals overflowed. Children starved. The country was breaking, and the people could take no more. Then, from the pain, rose an unexpected force. Liberian women, Christian and Muslim women stood together, unarmed, united and determined. They marched, they prayed, they protested, led by Lema Wowi. They demanded one thing: peace. Their pressure reached the negotiation table in August 2003 in Accra, Ghana. Liberia's warring parties signed the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. Charles Taylor resigned. He went into exile. United Nations peacekeepers arrived. After 14 years of bloodshed, the guns finally fell silent. In 2005, Liberia voted again, this time in peace. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was elected president, becoming Africa's first elected female head of state. Charles Taylor was later arrested, tried, and convicted for war crimes. Liberia became a long, painful work of rebuilding the war, but its echoes remains. The Liberian Civil War is not just a story of violence, it is a warning that freedom without inclusion is fragile, that injustice left unaddressed becomes a conflict, and that peace, true peace, must be protected. This is the story of Liberia. It's about Liberia. Follow for more.